Hello, and welcome. I would like to discuss an issue the President keeps hinting at and mentioning on a consistent basis. The ability to enact the Insurrection Act. I'll begin with playing audio from the President aboard Air Force One. Afterward I'll discuss Act and its intent.
We'll be discussing the farmers, we'll be discussing a lot of things, but fentanyl will be one of the things we'll discuss.
Sir, what did you mean last night when you said you were prepared to send more than the National Guard into American cities?
Sure, I would do that if it was necessary. If it was necessary, I'd do that, but it hasn't been necessary. We're doing a great job without that, but yeah, it was necessary. As you know, I'm allowed to do that.
Do you mean other branches of the military you would send in, or?
Who are you with?
The New York Times.
Very good. Well, if you write it correctly, I'll give you the answer. But if I want to enact a certain act, I'm allowed to do it routinely, and about 50% of presidents have used that, as you know, and I'd be allowed to do whatever I want. But we haven't chosen to do that because we're doing very well without it. But I'd be allowed to do that, you understand that? And the courts wouldn't get involved, nobody would get involved, and I could send the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, I can send anybody I wanted, but I haven't done that because we're doing so well without it.
The Insurrection Act of 1807 is a federal law that allows the President of the United States to deploy the military inside the country under very limited and extreme circumstances. It's one of the most serious powers a president has, because it authorizes the use of armed forces on U.S. soil, something that's normally prohibited under the Posse Comitatus Act, which bars the military from performing domestic law enforcement. The purpose of the Insurrection Act is to give the federal government a last resort tool to restore order when ordinary civil authorities are unable or unwilling to enforce the law. It is designed for moments of genuine national crisis, when local and state systems have broken down and constitutional order is at risk. When the President can use it. The law lays out a few specific conditions when the President may act. At the request of a state government, if a state faces an insurrection and its governor or legislature asks for help, the President may use the military to assist in restoring order. Without a state's request, if an insurrection, rebellion, or obstruction makes it impossible to enforce federal law within a state, the President may act on his own authority. To protect constitutional rights, if part of a state's population is being denied constitutional rights and the state's authorities are unable or unwilling to protect them, the President can intervene to enforce those rights. Before using military force, the President is generally required to issue a public proclamation ordering the groups involved to disperse and cease unlawful activity. Only if that fails can troops be deployed. Why it's considered a last resort. The Insurrection Act is not meant to be used lightly. Deploying the military against American citizens carries immense political, legal, and moral weight. It risks blurring the line between civilian policing and military action, a line that is fundamental to American democracy. That's why the act is reserved for dire circumstances, when civil authorities have completely lost control, when violence or rebellion threatens constitutional order, or when states are openly defying federal law or court rulings. It is not for moments of political tension or protest, but for genuine breakdowns of law and order. How many times it's been used? In over 2 centuries of American history, the Insurrection Act and its earlier versions have been used around 30 times, making it one of the least invoked emergency powers. Some of the most notable examples include 1807, Thomas Jefferson signed the original law, anticipating potential domestic unrest. 1861, Abraham Lincoln used it at the start of the Civil War to suppress the rebellion. 1957. President Dwight Eisenhower used it to enforce school desegregation in Little Rock, Arkansas, when the governor refused to comply with federal court orders. 1962 and 1963, President John F. Kennedy used it to enforce civil rights protections in Mississippi and Alabama. 1967, Lyndon Johnson invoked it during the Detroit riots. 1992, the most recent use came under President George H.W. Bush, when riots erupted in Los Angeles following the Rodney King verdict. In that case, California's governor requested federal help. Since 1992, no president has formally invoked the Insurrection Act, though it has occasionally been discussed in times of national unrest. Criteria for invocation. In simple terms, the President can invoke the Insurrection Act only when a state requests help because it can no longer control violence or rebellion. Federal law cannot be enforced by normal means because of unlawful obstruction or rebellion. Citizens' constitutional rights are being denied, and the state cannot or will not protect them. All other options have failed and civil authority has broken down to the point where federal intervention is absolutely necessary. The underlying idea is that military force within the United States should be the final option, not the first. The Act assumes that local law enforcement and the National Guard under state control are the primary responders to domestic crises. Historical lessons. When presidents have used the Insurrection Act, it has often been to protect the rule of law or uphold constitutional rights in the face of resistance, not to silence dissent or manage political unrest. Every historical example reinforces how carefully the power must be used. Presidents who invoked it generally did so only after negotiations failed, after courts were ignored, and after violence had overwhelmed civilian control. The Act's use was seen as a means of restoring the normal function of government, not replacing it with military rule. Modern relevance. In recent years, there have been renewed discussions about whether the Insurrection Act might be used again during periods of civil unrest or widespread disorder. Legal scholars and military leaders consistently caution that such a step would be extraordinary and must meet the strict historical standard of dire necessity. That means the country would have to face a genuine breakdown of law and order, not just political division, protest, or disagreement. The bar is intentionally high to protect American civil liberties and prevent abuse of power. Final reflection. Given this history and the clear intent of the law, one key question remains. Does the current environment in the United States meet the threshold for invoking the Insurrection Act? Are we truly facing an insurrection, an uprising beyond the capacity of civil authorities, or do we still have functioning courts, police, and state governments capable of enforcing the law? That is the question every president, legislator, and citizen must consider carefully before ever calling upon the extraordinary power of the Insurrection Act. Stay informed. Stay free.